part of the workshop. If one of you need to talk, maybe let them know that discreetly, that would be lovely, thank you. I'm going to take questions from the audience today. If anybody does want to ask a question and they don't want to be online, I absolutely understand that. If you want to put your hands up and do this, then I'll make sure that somebody can get that question to me and we can ask it so you've got a degree of anonymity. I think there's lots of new faces here today. Certainly I don't recognise any of these faces from last time. And even though there's lots and lots of new people, it's still a well-attended workshop. So that's my pleasure, my privilege to be here today. So thank you for joining us. Obviously, I do the health and mental practices here in LAMchester. This started a number of years ago down in London, King Street, London more regularly. It was always well attended. It's become a feature now of the community to provide a space for people to think about topics that are not directly related to what we do in terms of play, impact, sensation, a BDSM skill as such, but around the act of how we communicate, how we look after ourselves, how we look after one another, and making sure that our mental health and everybody's well-being, I suppose, is a major priority, because ultimately whatever goes on between the sheets or, in terms of BDSM, a lot of it's, isn't it? Be it sex, be it sexuality, be it kink, be it, and I think until that point it was underrepresented. So that's why I'm here today to deliver this workshop. That's why I'm so passionate about making sure that somebody does, fill this slot and we make the most of it. And I guess from me to you, it's to say thank you for attending today and for being here. It's very much kind of an open floor for people who have attended. I always ask people for a little bit show of hands, if they don't mind. How many people is it their first LAMchester? I've not been told before. Wow, okay, that's a lot of people. How many people is it your first ever BDSM event? Okay, so less, but still probably at least a third of the room. So again, thank you for making this your first event. Hopefully you'll find it welcoming. Hopefully you will enjoy it and you will keep coming back. If anybody does have any questions or anything that they would like to discuss and they do not want it in this forum, because this forum very much is, a cooperative, I welcome comments, opinions, challenges, different opinions and perspectives from everybody to participate. If people aren't happy with that, or they'd like to come and talk to me one-on-one, then I always say I'm available after the workshop, probably for around an hour, because I'm involved in another workshop, and they can come and they can catch me, they can ask me any questions, they can come and have some time with me one-on-one if that's what they want. But I guess that's that side of it. The floor's open to you guys now. Has anybody got anything that they want to ask, or a question, or who wants to start? This workshop's for you guys. Has anybody got anything? Someone's got a question. I cannot believe we have all of these people in this room. So many of you. It's the first event and we've got no questions. Aha. How did I get involved in this? Oh, that's a big interesting question. Honestly, the honest answer to that is I was writing a dissertation at university. I was 19 years old and I was writing something about consent, interestingly enough, and I googled the search term informed consent. Now I don't know how many of you are old enough, this is more than how I knew you would, how many of us remember that term, but in the olden days, before we had FetLife and before we had things like that, we had two, I guess, BDSM websites. We had Colony, was a really old one. Now I'm going back there on it. And we had a website, the main website in the UK was something called Informed Consent. It was run by a gentleman who's not around so much anymore, called Thanos, and he started it as a place where people could meet, could communicate. Do you know what? I have a lot of time, a lot of respect for that human being. And in actual fact, it was kind of social media before we had social media. Before Zuckerberg had invented, Facebook and had the idea to share information. He had that innovation to think, what can I do for the scene? And it was just listing events, it was listing things that were on there. And then after that, things like chat pages and blogs and commentary and was added. And a lot of the websites that are on now, like FetLife, when you look at them, obviously they look different. This one was a bit bolder, and to be honest, it was white and blue, whereas we've got the black and purple of FetLife. But that's where that started. So I was a student, like I think a lot of you guys are there, sat in my halls of residence on my computer researching for an assessment, typed informed consent in, and thought, oh my God, my tribe, my people, I'm not a weirdo. There's other people who like doing this. There's other people who want to be sat in a cell for several hours. There's other people who get off on this, kinky shit that I love, and I thought it was just me. And the rest, I guess, as they say, is history. I went to my first event very soon after that, which was Club Lash in Manchester, back when it was in a dungeon space, and it was held in the nightclub. It's sadly got a different venue now, and I've never looked back. I was in an MS poly relationship for a long time. I'm now in a different kind of relationship. I've evolved, the scene's evolved, the community's evolved, but I guess my passion has remained. And I went from that university, as I qualified in a clinical degree, which is why I was researching that. And then I went on and did some qualifications in DBT therapy. So that's dialectical behavioural therapy, if you are aware. You are aware. So I'm a DBT therapist, and I have changed, reinvented myself, reincarnated, as we all do, as a team does and as a community does over the years. But I remain passionate that it's really important to have spaces like this, like what LAMchester offers, for people to have their first introduction. And I had a really good time. I met some good people when I first entered the scene. And thank you for that. How about yourself? How long have you been around for? Is it a while?
Yeah, basically. I'm also currently in the psychology and crafts. I've only been through sessions and it's like free therapy, counseling, that's where the question came from.
Thank you. And you know what? I think there's a lot of people who are in, caregiving professions in, that itself a question, isn't it? Why are there so many people who have represent neurodiversity in the BDSM scene? And that has a quite an obvious answer in terms of people who like structure, they like routines, they like relationships with dynamics and rules. And then you also have lots of caregivers and lots of empaths. And obviously I'm generalising wildly there. But, and certain, I guess, relationship dynamics, which I'll come on to later today, certain relationship dynamics obviously are very appealing to that kind of personality and that group as well. So you do find a lot of us out there. There's so many unwritten PhDs in this community, it's unreal. So thank you for your question. Has anybody else got a question about that?
No questions. I miss IC, I thought it was bad.
You miss IC and...
It's bad fun.
Yeah, I mean, I share that personal opinion as well. I know lots of people have different opinions, but what do we always talk about in my line of work? We always talk about the importance of radical acceptance. And IC's been gone for a little while now, and I have accepted that it's not coming back. I guess. Sorry, just a few years. I guess I'm in a privileged position of I'm able to see some reasons as to why that has demised and why it won't come back, and that's not information for this forum. But ultimately, I don't think we'll see a revision of it. And I think ultimately it's about making the best of what we've got. And FetLife has some features that are great, it has some things that are not so great. And I think the scene has adjusted to that change and that. But it feels, I don't know, for me, a little bit more segmented. Have smaller groups and smaller, and there's not that cohesion in terms of this is all about UK events. It's
That's particularly it's obviously it's a Canadian American site, whereas, as you say, IC was a purely UK scene. Events all over the UK. You didn't have to search for a location because you all be listed in the events page.
And now we sound like those people talking about the good old days, don't we? But I think ultimately as well, what I will say, and I cannot I cannot be in the onus of transparency and full disclosure. I can't be impartial on the subject because I was in a relationship with Thomas at some point and we remained good friends. So put that out there. However, hopefully the fact that it has been away and it has been away for so long demonstrates the fact that it's not an easy thing to replicate. I think lots of people thought when it did demise, something else would come along, it would take its place. And I don't have the skill sets to do that. And I'm a people person, not a technology person. And back to what I was saying about neurodiversity in the community, there are a lot of computer IT people in the community, but it was a real task to run that, to build it, to maintain it. What went into it was a lot of time, and people who ultimately do create something for the community and are able to do that with a degree of longevity. And that includes actually Cosmic and that. It might not be a website, but certainly an event in space like this. It's a really, really, thankless, difficult task. And I did hope that someone would come along and recreate something similar, but they haven't. So if any of you guys are, feeling that that's something you would like to do in the future, there's a gap in the market there for somebody, but
I'm going to throw the cautionary note in that one. That if there are, let's say, 10 active kink sites at the moment, then there are a good 100 that used to be active.
Yeah, and what I will say is as well, sorry to speak off, but I think legislation in the UK changed as well. And what used to be something that had minimal risk attached to it probably has, had more risk for a certain period of time. And I guess that will come and go since then, since the demise of IC, is what we called it, we had 50 Shades of Grey. So that obviously changed the landscape a little bit. So the landscape does alter and it feels safer at some points and unsafer at others. A little bit like the world, I suppose, of what's happening at the moment. But the point that I'm making was those were some of the considerations as well for going away. So I can fully understand why somebody hasn't taken that back and run with it. I from an investment from a personal perspective, what it takes out of a human being, but also when you're doing a risk benefit analysis, personally, it's not a chalice-sided right either. So
there's a very good reason why we don't have a forum and community attached to the LAM website, because actually the time and energy it takes to maintain it and constantly marshalling people, no, you can't just arrive and declare this, you've got to be kind of sensible and we're here for everyone. It's just too complex. So we prefer to stick it to live events, and that way we can actually have enough of us in, almost as moderators to facilitate things as they go on. Much easier to do it in real person than to do it online, because you might type something and it's not necessarily what someone's going to read, and then they get the wrong idea.
Yeah. Has anybody else got any other questions or comments?
When it comes to a caregiver role in being in the scene, what's the main difference between the community and other communities? So I'm a caregiver in the festival scene, and I'm just curious to what you think might be the biggest sort of thing to take into account when doing a caregiving role in the
So that's really interesting. I mean, I guess for me, I would question what you mean by caregiver. I mean, my obvious initial answer to that question is sex, sexuality. What is the driving factor behind it? So for you, if you're giving care in a festival, I don't really know what you mean by that. What role are you specifically talking about?
So like mental health. When it's a mental health crisis, I would
Okay.
helping resolve.
Brilliant. So when I use the term caregiver in terms of the BDSM space, so I'm using that as a term that reflects a relationship dynamic. So in the same way that you might have a dominant, let's say a dominant man, so a dog. That in itself is an interesting question, because for a long time we didn't use the term daddy, for example. I would say a daddy is a caregiver. We didn't use the term daddy in the scene. It was unfashionable for a little bit. Again, fashions change and it's quite popular right now. And we would use things like a paternalistic DS relationship, whatever that means. But it means that there's a relationship with a dynamic, and one person's quite paternalistic and looking after providing care. So when I use the word caregiver, I'm using it as a title in a relationship. And obviously with that is the undercurrent of, sex. Lots of caregiving relationships aren't sexual, but the drive for that relationship is about, there's an expectation of something, isn't there? You want something from your little, be it obedience, be it your cocksucked, be it, so it's very specific. In terms of what you're talking about, there, you're almost talking about kind of mental health first aid and that looking after. And I guess it's really, really interesting. And there was a talk that is available on YouTube that was only given last week by the Keep Tree, if you wanted to look at it. And it talks about actually mentorship and mentorship in the BDSM community. And I sit here and I'm very transparent and I say, this is who I am, this is how long I've been around, and this is my qualification. But I am not a mentor. I'm nobody's mentor. And in fact, if you wanted to find somebody who had an opinion of me that wasn't high, I'm sure you could find one even in this room and even in this event. That's the reality of it. So I come here with this is who I am, take what you will from it, leave what you will, ask lots of questions and make your own decisions about it. And I think sometimes in the BDSM community, you do have people who want to perhaps behave as mentors, they want to be caregivers in the way you're using the word, they want to look after and support the mental well-being of people. And for me, it's always what drives that, what motivates that, why do they want to do that. If there's a power dynamic going on there, if they're doing it because they want play, they want sex, they have an expectation of being able to flog you, or they're training you, what does that mean? They're training you to their preferences. That's something that you've got to have a real think about. I mean, I think any good event though should have somebody who is there looking after emotional well-being. So if somebody has a panic attack at the after party, what's that going to look like? And the crew here will know, who's the first aider, if somebody needs some attention, who's best placed in the room to be able to look after that. If a scene has to be stopped, somebody needs some support, who's going to be able to talk somebody down from panic attack in 5 minutes. I'll probably, but I'm not the only one here, there's a few others. And it's about having an understanding of who fits where. If somebody needs some rope, or they need, what are the skill sets of the crew. So in the same as a festival, you might have that. You do have those roles within BDSM as well. Does that make sense? But caregiver is very different. It talks about, and I think for people who are interested in caregiving relationships and relationships that involve perhaps age play, or perhaps middle, little, that kind of dynamic. I think that's one of the workshops next month as well. Don't quote me. I think it's going to be
the taxonomy and diversity of littles.
Yes. So, and that will talk at length about as well. So hopefully, does that answer the question?
That's great.
Thank you. Is anybody else?
One thing I would say, in your use of the word caregiver, you're talking about a large group of people, and I think generally with scene counsellors, it's generally a one-on-one or small group based type thing. But if you get that joy from caring for others, then it's not unrealistic to think that actually you may get that same joy in a DS or kinky context as well.
Yeah. And what does that look like? I enjoy supporting people with their mental well-being. I love coaching people. I enjoy watching them grow. It's a huge part of who I am, what I do as a living. That's very, very different to my enjoyment of being a caregiver with somebody I have a close interpersonal relationship with, and I want to tell them what to do because I think it's for their own good. One of those, to be crude, one of those gets me wet in the gutter, the other one certainly doesn't. But it's testament to my personality and character that's kind of who I am, and that runs across the board. What is important is to be able to recognise, personal boundaries, where one sits, which element is at play and what hat is one wearing at any time. And I suppose, to be perfectly honest, this is probably the forum closest where that comes together a little bit. This is about me supporting the people in the community that I really care about and feel passionate about, but also doing it in a way that brings my skills professionally. This is as close as it gets to crossing. So, who else has got a question?
So, on the scene as a caregiver, you obviously have a lot of challenging situations within that, and where would you kind of draw the line between, okay, I'm being a caregiver here, and actually someone with some sort of therapy background or medical training would be more appropriate?
And I think that is about boundaries and accountability, isn't it? And ultimately, if you are in a caregiver role for a person, are they maintaining their autonomy? Are they maintaining their responsibility and their accountability to look after themselves? If I'm engaging with somebody in a consensual relationship that involves give and take, exactly the same as if I was putting someone over a bit of furniture and I was flogging them. I would be talking to them about what I'm going to do, where the line is, where consent is, what that scene looks like. It has parameters to it. And you know, it's no different in terms of a caregiving relationship or a relationship that involves, say, one citizen. You know, what are the pre-negotiated and communicated parameters of that? What are we both getting from it? It's a transaction, it's a relationship. It's supposed to be fun. It's supposed to, obviously, you can have non-sexual, you know, daddies and little, but quite often it is about sex or it's about some sort of gratification, whatever that is. What you're talking about, I guess, is outside of that relationship. You know, if somebody ultimately has difficulties that span outside of that interaction and they would benefit from support, from mental health advice, from well-being, that's going to be able to recognise that, you know, this is not within the confines of this relationship. And some relationships are different than others. Some of them are, do you know what, I'm going to enjoy your company at a weekend once a month. Some are, do you know what, I'm going to, you know, be your 24/7 caregiver, we're going to live together. And with that, I'd be doing some very, very careful work about dependence. What does dependency in a relationship look like? What's healthy, what's not healthy, where the boundaries going to be drawn? You know, that's critical. But we cannot assume accountability for another person and another human being's emotional well-being. And that's actually a contentious thing to say, because some people would say, well, in certain kinds of DS relationships, we can. You know, I'm going to have an obedience act, and I'm going to say to somebody, right, you brush your teeth every day, and you know, you have a shower, and you take your antidepressants, and those things are on that act, and that's when it starts getting clouded. But the reality is, I would think things like that were in the context of a relationship that was discussed. And it's the same, you have the same challenges of anybody who has a 24/7 carer for other reasons. So where does dependency in a relationship comfortably sit? And
it's also not just the support that they need, it's also the skills that you have internally. So if you are naturally in the kind of psychology and support area, or you've studied it, or you've got those skill sets, you can extend that help within ethical boundaries. Whereas if it's not your skill set, or again, I'm going to say something slightly controversial, if you had, for example, Asperger's, so your understanding and interaction of another person's emotions are different to other people's, then you've got to be aware of that and say, okay, I have to set a boundary that's very much here because I don't have that skill set. And in the same way that you might, as part of building up a complex relationship, if the person you're playing with, oh my God, they just love rope, it's going to get them wet in the gusset every time, then, and you can't do rope, then you've got to find a way of integrating and getting that into the mix. If it's a serious issue, then let's all be honest and say, unless you're studying and have got the certificates, not the thing you should be messing around.
even then, though, you know, even if you're studying and you've got the certificates, ultimately, if you're in an interpersonal relationship and you're having sex with somebody, you know, I'd like to think, I'm a pretty competent TBT therapist. I'm not going to offer therapy to, you know, my other half, who's here in the room, who I'm married to. You know, if he needs to access therapy, he's going to find somebody else. We might go couples work together, but if we go to couples work, it's not going to be a therapist who sees them individually, because there's rules and there's boundaries and there's expectations of what is appropriate. And I think that's what has to be discussed, you know, within the context of a relationship. You want me to care for you, this care that you elicit, you know, tucking you in at bed at night and kissing your forehead, do you know what? That's okay. I can get up on that, you can get off on that. This is great, this is lovely. You know, what goes on underneath those sheets when you're tucking them in? That needs discussion. Some people will want one thing, another person will want another thing entirely. Ultimately, if someone's saying to you, I want you to be responsible for paying all of my bills because I'm not managing to do that, or I want you to, that might be something that's kind or okay. And it's about what's appropriate in that relationship. And that really has to be discussed. And if you're not sure, if you've got somebody who's got trauma, who's got mental health problems, and you're not sure about that, then that's when you do say, do you know what, let's find somebody who's kink aware to have a chat with. You know, there are people out there who, you know, their kink pages is full of counsellors, full of people who will work with people who perhaps have found it difficult to access meaningful mental health support before because they're worried that they can't be transparent about all of themselves. that, it's really hard to get good quality therapy if you are holding back and you can't talk about your relationship or yourself or your kink or because you're fear of reprisals. And I think that is one thing that's changed. We talk about the good old days. I think if you're trying to find somebody that you could transparently have interpersonal therapy with and talk about all this shit 10 years ago, you'd be one of the man in white coats would be coming. Now you can go on the pick pages and you can find a list of kink-friendly and alternative lifestyle-friendly therapists who would be happy to work with you. So, it is about what's appropriate for a relationship and what actually needs out. It's like, you've got a headache, you're going to go to the pharmacy and take a couple of paracetamol. If you've got a serious brain injury, you're not going to go to the local pharmacy, are you? And I guess when you're looking at somebody's mental well-being and their difficulties, what is it we're dealing with here? Is it a pharmacy? Is it GP practice? Is it A&E? Oh my God, do they need CPR? It's very, very different. And we need to start looking at mental health difficulties inside and outside of a relationship in the same way. Yes.
I'm going to explain why I chuckle for that. But it wasn't quite 10 years ago, but 15 years ago, the classification of mental disorders included F65, which was engaging in sadomasochistic behaviour. So actually, when I was going through therapy 18 years ago, one of the things that I had post-traumatic stress disorder, which is it 55 or something on the list?
Not in the new one.
Yeah. On the old one, it was 55.
Yeah.
And literally my therapist kind of went one day, well, you made some great progress, but I do need to warn you, because when I came in, I was wearing a suit and was very much straight looking. And then one weekend, I kind of had this decision to go to Camden Market, dress in leather and walk into Priory in London on the Monday morning. And he's like, oh, you've made some life-changing decisions this weekend. And at the end of the session, picks up the book and the manual and goes, post-traumatic stress disorder, 55, flicks a couple of pages and goes 57 or 65 for the kink stuff. Thankfully, that's now been dropped, because back in those days, if you went into the wrong therapist's room, you might be going out in a white straitjacket, because they had the power to do it.
And I mean, that's the thing. Stigma has obviously changed, and we're not there completely. We look at cross-dressing. You don't have to look far back in social history to look at, things in relation to sexuality and obviously to be gay. And there's still so much to be done in terms of the rights of certain communities and people. And I think society's attitudes are changing, but I think it's that balance. Personally, this is a really contentious personal opinion, but I'm going to put it out there. Sometimes I think we've gone too far the other way, and we will put everything online. For me, it's a little bit of, once it's out there, once it's in that public domain, you can't get it back. If you are putting, things on, adult work or OnlyFans or face pics up, or being very transparent or documenting your journey into kink and sexuality all over the internet, what happens in 5 years' time when you've got a corporate career and they take exception to that. So I in all things, I talk about the middle path, and I talk about balance. And I think we went from being extremely scared and secretive to now being, oh my God, we've got kink talk, is it? Kink talk. We've gone almost from one extreme to another, and I think it's about being careful. It's about being really measured and really, have a consideration of what we're putting out there. But things have changed, and I think we can at least get to a stage where we can access appropriate support and have spaces like this as well. To talk about things, to talk to one another, to feel that we can ask questions. Anybody else got a question? I'll cover you and then I'll cover you. Is that right? Yeah.
Given that there are quite a few new people here in general, why do you think it's important to socialise and network with other people that are in the community for the benefit of the individual's personal health and mental health?
Okay, ultimately I think it's really important to interact with people who have things in common with us anyway, that finding our tribe. Do I think that has to be in person? No, of course I don't. I think for a lot of people, getting out to things is really prohibitive. They feel a lot safer. Talk about neurodiversity. They feel that there's real barriers to them accessing a space like this. We've just been through a pandemic, for example, where we've been encouraged to not do so. So I think ultimately it's about being able to communicate. It's to be able to be social, to be able to, we are creatures who need to feel secure and feel safe, but also be able to feel adventure. I'm doing a workshop on trust layers. I've just been writing about that. trust is the thing that bridges that gap between those two things. So I think that's really, really important to have connections with like-minded people. And also how we're going to find people we want to do fun things with if we're not socialising with one another. I think in-person events though, it's like Technicolor, isn't it? It brings another, is something 2D or is it 3D? What does it bring to the table? Some people are perfectly happy with 2D. I spoke to someone the other day, they had a black and white telly. What's that all about? I might sit there and say, you need a colour telly, go and get
cheaper license.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. That's what they said to me. There's perks to that. It's a cheaper license, and you can put a spin on that to anything. But personally, I love the community. I love face-to-face contact. I like to be able to meet new people. I find people fascinating. I find them interesting. But that's me. Some people find people extremely intimidating. But I think also you get a feel for the community spaces that are acceptable. When you ultimately are in a microcosm of online, or you are surrounded by the same, or you're surrounded by people who ultimately are, the small fish, in this pond that they've created. So big fish in the small pond that they've created, and ultimately you are not reflecting what else is going on. Whereas something like this is far more, well, who's around? What else is around? Is there other options? There's not just this one Discord server and this one group of people, and these people monopolising this area of BDSM. There's actually 3 different lunches going on, 4 events, 5 after parties, 6 clubs, and 7 ways to do sploshing, and none of them are right and wrong. And you do not have that variety sometimes when you're in a space like that. And different people and different events offer different perceptions, different perspectives, different ways of doing things. I literally never come to an event. I've been coming to events for a long time now, certainly over 15 years. And I've never spent time in a space like this and not learned something, literally, or met somebody who I thought, oh wow, they were interesting, or they were fascinating, or I liked what they were wearing, oh my god, they had shoes that I'm coveted, or I love that. And that's what you get, only the other day, it's like, oh, it's a new course to supply. And you don't get that online quite often, you really, really don't. So, but am I saying that's the only way to do it? No, I don't think it is.
To me, it's also massively important to meet people in person and sooner rather than later, because there are lots of people who are very, very adept at giving an impression online. They might be a fantastic writer. I'm going to be slightly controversial here, and I know it's going out live. I don't care. They can burn me at the stake for this one. There is a person on FetLife. They are a great writer. Their stuff is brilliant to read. Unfortunately, they're a COVID. So this is all a big conspiracy, and COVID-19 doesn't actually exist, and we're all being conned into left, right, and centre. And as a result, they produce brilliant, well-structured pieces of writing that's just basically shit. Now, they used to be a great person to follow their writings on DS and dynamics and stuff like that, but they've just produced 2 years worth of crap. Now, in that particular case, it's that meeting the person, you need to say, okay, are they as good in person as they are in writing? And sometimes it's not going to be the case.
And this is where Cosmic and I don't know if I'm going to disagree, but I'm going to counter that. And like I say, this happens, we've known each other all the time. But I think that's really interesting. So Cosmic has quite often black and white way of viewing the world, and he'll be quite open and honest about that. So for me, is the fact that somebody's a COVID denier, does that discredit and discount everything they know and they have written about DS or yeah.
No, I wouldn't say it does,
Yeah.
but in this particular case, they've used their skills as a great writer in a really shitty way.
Yeah, and again they have, and ultimately it's about that act. Somebody, is a COVID denier or doesn't believe COVID is the issue that I perhaps think it is, and they're very good at understanding and grasping and writing things about DX. And I think it's really interesting because we talk all the time about, and I say this quite often in workshops, that behind the scenes and the show reel and the difference between that. And that's an interesting thing when things are solely kept to online, is what is real. The amount of, and this is again the example, is the amount of beautiful, stunning water bondage pictures. I'm a huge fan of water bondage pictures that you see on FetLife that look absolutely amazing, and I think they're brilliant. Every single one of those pictures that has a support diver there with an oxygen tank or has oxygen on tap, for me, should have a disclaimer written saying, this is not something, when we watch the telly and it says, don't try this at home, they should all have a don't try this at home caveat, because, I'm masturbating over it with the rest of it. But there's part of me thinking there will be people out there who do not understand this is not real. This is ultimately somebody's show reel. This is not the full picture of what's going on. And that's what happens online. Sometimes people are very, very adept at behaving in ways that are not particularly authentic, even in person, and they can be very skilled and adept at that, and it takes you a long time until you realise, do you know what, the uncle's got no clothes on. However, it's a lot harder to do that in person. Online, what's real, what's not real, that assessment of things is far more difficult. And not even for negative reasons, just because someone wants to create a beautiful picture and be an Instagram famous. It's not even malignant at times, it just is. And I think that's one of the things that bringing things to the real world is a benefit for. You get to see, is this real? What is actually going on? How do I feel to someone? What's the interaction? What's all the prep that's gone into this scene? Somebody will probably be doing wax later on. You will not just see the beautiful imagery of the wax play at the end. You'll see everything else. You'll see the sheets going down, you'll see the interaction, you'll see that I'm going to play with a knife and take it all off essentially, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. There's nothing wrong with going on FetLife and looking at a beautiful wax picture, but you're only seeing a tiny microcosm of that, something like this, you absorb it all. And I guess for me, that's the difference.
And rope is the very big one on that.
Yeah.
If you're a rigger, you want to show off your skills. So you want to show the suspension of someone by their little toenail underneath a bridge in Central Park in New York. Now, the reality is, while that may be technically possible for someone to hold that pose for about 5.5 seconds, which is all it takes to take a picture, it's the 7 or 8 people who are just off frame that up until that point were literally lifting the person up in the rope and supporting their entire body weight, and they've all gone, go, dropped, run out the way. She's holding a big grin as best as possible, and it creates an artificial impression.
So I hope that answers that question. But I understand that for some people, environments like this are really challenging. I think that's the end that I always try to bring to us. I did probably just come back to you, so.
Yeah, I was going to say, is there like a less of that life evolved through, well not through kids and the counsellors or therapists of
Yeah, there's not a list on FetLife. There is a group that is ultimately about people who are involved in the BDSM community, who are therapists, psychologists, pink pages is really good. I think ultimately the difficulty I have with FetLife in terms of an environment like this is there's somebody on there who uses the word counsellor in their profile name, which is not for me to determine what people call themselves, just to be very clear, but they have no qualification whatsoever when it comes to it. So I think like all areas, it's about doing due diligence, it's about talking to people, it's about looking for personal recommendations. They are kid-friendly therapists available. There's several in the UK. Some of the ones that I have the most respect for aren't even listed on the big pages. There's pros and cons to being listed with different bodies. One thing, they cost. They're a lot of effort if you don't need to. So it's a little bit like word of mouth. I know it sounds terrible, but if you were looking for somebody working with your brakes on your car, how would you be making that decision? How would you be making sure that you're happy with who's going to do that work? And I think when it comes to mental health, and anybody who is personally, I think who's saying, I work in the community and I am a therapist, would be more than happy to have an exchange with you about this is what I do, these are my qualifications, this is how to book me. I'll see you for 20 minutes and talk about what you need and what you want and see if we're a good fit, because quite often you're not a good fit. Do we have a good interpersonal relationship? I'll work with you. For me, I try and get things off FetLife as quickly as possible. I get a few, someone might contact me and send me a message, and then I will say, right, this is my website, this is my booking form, can we have a chat? Because ultimately, it's about, I don't really trust it in terms of security and sending personal information back and forwards. I'd rather use a protected email that I pay for and that but there certainly are people there. You can find people there. And again, people can just but I really recommend that group because there's some really good stuff in there. A lot of it's people who aren't UK based, but it's a good place to start.
So is it called pin pages?
Big Pages is external of FetLife, and that's kind of that's an organisation who collate therapists in the UK, and a lot of them, certainly not just BDSM and fetish, but they collate people who will work with couples, polycules, alternative, be trans, be it starters, because people in the gay communities have a start in Pages to provide therapy. So that's outside of it. In terms of on FetLife, there's a really good group. You search for groups on FetLife. There's one, if you put mental health professionals into it, it's basically therapists, clinicians, counsellors who are involved in BDSM community, and people can ask questions there. And some of that content is really good, but they don't have a list of BDSM therapists. But a lot of people do go on there and say, I'm looking for a BDSM, a little bit like, I'm looking for a daddy in the Northwest, anybody there? I'm looking for a BDSM therapist in Manchester, does anybody know one? And some people will comment, some people don't. But it really does just come down to doing your due diligence. In the same way if you're looking for another healthcare provider, you can just look and see what working for them.
The other one is CAP, kink aware professionals. It's another list of therapists, but again, as Poppy said,
I'm not on either, if I'm being honest. I'm not on either, Kinship's not on either, so...
And my answer to this is you've got to find it. Doing work with a therapist is another relationship. So you've got to decide, are you one of those people who is going to have a skinful and go to the swingers club and just, do something at random, or do you actually have a progression, what you want to develop, how you want to go? And sometimes it's difficult because you see yourself as the person who needs the help, and you're not necessarily going, I still have the decision of who I'm working with, because you get the right person, they will push you, they will challenge you, they will support you, they will be there for you. You get the wrong person, and you're never going to get that connection. You're not going to actually open up to each other and really get the dialogue going. So,
it is, and it's
my two favourite therapists aren't on either of the lists. And I will still say to people, you know what? I think personality, you might match this person or that person, but ultimately, go and talk to the person that you're thinking of having therapy with. Spend a little bit of time and make that judgment call. If you're comfortable and happy, it's a much easier process.
No therapist worth the salt will say I'm a good fit for everybody. They're really, there's things that I don't like to work with for my own lived experience reasons. I had I've been really open and honest. She's passed away now, but I had a sister who had very, very severe anorexia for a number of years. I don't ideally work with clients where that's the primary thing that they want to work on. If it's a secondary matter for coping, I will, but I do not consider myself to be an eating disorder specialist because it's not something I find it very, very difficult to work with. I know the kink shrink, that's an area of speciality for them. They've worked in hospitals and institutions of eating disorders for many years. Every therapist will say, this is an area I'm really good at, I'm skilled at, I've done further work here, be it age groups, will it be modalities, be it, areas of clinical special interest. Some people will have things like, oh, I don't like that, I'm not so great there, that's not for me. And it's about that fit, it's about that relationship. I will not be a good fit for everybody. Not every therapist will be a good fit for any person who wants to work with them. Some people work brilliantly with couples, some people are absolutely terrible with couples. So it is about finding that match. And it can be hard, and I get that there's barriers to that, there's financial considerations, there's lots of considerations, but there will be a good match out there, and absolutely certain if that's what you want, and it's about how you find it. I hope that.
No, but it does, I've been in kind of counselling for a while, I think.
Yeah.
I studied through the NHS.
Yeah.
And obviously, like you said, you can't really match things to somebody in the NHS, but otherwise, they're going to be put in place, and like you said, you're like, walking out there. Straight on it. I did it privately, and I still couldn't really. I touched on it, but there wasn't the expertise that I really go into it. I had thoughts of people, but they're coming back onto the scene.
Okay.
So I kind of feel possibly it might be better finding somebody else because they work because they could permanently well. See if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's a really.
Back on the scene might be a bit complex.
And that's a really good differential. You have therapists who are kink aware and kink friendly, and then you have therapists who are kink active. And it's really funny. Now, I don't really want to know, but I've got 2 dogs with me today. You think, where the hell is she going with this? I've got 2 dogs today, and the amount of places where I take them and they say we're a dog-friendly venue, and what they actually mean is a dog-tolerant venue, but they make you feel a little bit uncomfortable. And then you go some places, and oh my God, you brought the dogs. Let me bring you some water. Let me bring you a dog bed. We do a doggy Sunday dinner. It's £2.50. That's a dog-friendly place. Other places are tolerant because they're having money. There's a real difference. And I guess when we talk about being a kink-friendly therapist, what do we mean? Are we kink aware? Are we kink active? Are we going to perform? With people that they work with? Some people are okay with that. But again, I have events I go to where people that I work with out there. If you want to smile, if you're making presentations, you want me to talk. If you're there, I absolutely will not play. No, if you're playing, do you want me to be? And it's those conversations that are really important to have. And anybody who works against the site have those. They should.
We did.
Good.
Have that conversation.
Good. I'm pleased to hear it. Has anybody else has anybody else got any questions or anything else?
Got about 5 minutes.
About mental health or about play? It doesn't have to be about, it can be about play, it can be about events, it can be about maybe your first foray into something like this. Anything at all. Looks like any questions. No?
How might you avoid conflating things like self-harm and that?
Oh, that's a big question that we get asked all of the time. No, I love that question. We do get asked it a lot. How do you differentiate between self-harm and masochism? And I think ultimately intent, if you want me to answer that, it is about intent. And self-harm is a maladaptive coping, and I'm not the sort of therapist who is anti-self-harm particularly. I think if self-harm is going to keep you alive, I'm all for it. I've always been that way. I was making self-harm boxes for clinical environments back when people thought I was mad to be doing that, and now it's what we do. How do we manage that in a BDSM community is really interesting, isn't it? If somebody is saying to me that they want self-harm by proxy, they're not feeling good about themselves, they want, to manage their emotions, because that's what we're saying with BDSM, that's what, I'm not even saying I won't do that, but I'm saying that needs very careful communication, understanding, and consent. Can somebody be masochistic in a sexual way and still self-harm? Of course they can. How many of us come to events and ultimately really enjoy a glass of wine after a really shitty day, but like getting a flogging? There can be different. This can be something we use to manage our emotions, and this can be something we compartmentalize over here and enjoy. And I think quite often the misunderstanding is that they can't be separate. You are either, if you are doing play and you are a masochist and you are enjoying pain and you do self-harm, that there must be something in between, that bridge joining them together. And for a lot of people who self-harm and who enjoy masochism, they don't. This is their way of coping after a difficult day, and this is their cinema trick. And it's about communication, it's about talking. If you are someone who self-harms though, and you are using pain and masochism and BDSM as a way to manage a negative, difficult emotion, making yourself feel difficult and about yourself, I'm going to say it would be good to have a therapy session with somebody to talk to you about it. Of course I'm going to say that now. But I genuinely do believe that. And I believe it's about how do you start compartmentalizing those two things and say, well, this is my masochistic self who enjoys pain. Do you actually enjoy pain? And this is the way that I cope with really difficult emotions when I've had a bad day, and it's through self-harm and keeps me alive. And then at least separate them. And then when they're separate, then you can say, this is my maladaptive coping. This is the harm that I do to myself when I don't feel good. I might be cutting, that might be the obvious thing. We assume it's pain. I might be going out and protecting sex with somebody and making ourselves feel shit. It's not always about something that's masochistic. This is what I do when I don't feel great about myself. I'm going to start working on that. I'm going to look at why I did that. I'm going to do the work. But I've separated it out from this side and making you enjoy it. Consensual, communicated, understood, boundaried, masochistic BDSM. And those two things coexist until someone sorted out this one. Yes, you can. Do they always? Are people insightful enough and self-aware enough? No, not always. So that's why communication and negotiations at the top is really, really important. Someone says to me, you know what, I self-harm sometimes when I don't feel great, you know, will I still play with them? Yes. Am I going to do a lot more pre-mortem than the BDSM scene? Of course I am. It's like the same as somebody says to me, do you know what, I really, really want to do some play with you, but I've got epilepsy. Okay, that's great, we need to talk about it. What does that mean for you? What do you need? What's the chances that you have a seizure? What kind of seizure will you have? What meds you on? When do you take it? Are you taking it regularly? Are you going to change something? Exactly the same with mental health conditions. Self-harm is one of them. Does that answer that question and make sense? Yeah? Thank you for it. We get that one. I think we're at time. Again, what I will say is, I will be around for a little bit after this workshop if anybody wants to grab me. That's absolutely fine. I am going to go and grab a drink now because I'm doing one afterwards. I've got a 4 o'clock workshop today, which is building trust and dynamics within the BDSM. So it's a little bit more, you know, talking, it's similar, but very specific to relationships and building relationships. And then I think there's a workshop before me, which is on electrics and violet ones.
It's a brief history of violet wands with Baron from BVK Fetish.
Yeah. And can I just thank everybody for coming today? I hope you all have a brilliant time. Ultimately, I think it's fabulous that you guys always attend these workshops because they make the community more self-aware when it comes to everything we're talking about today. So thank you all.